to look at the controller. We saw an example of the router, which was the route that we defined, and we defined a model within it. That was sort of an example of the route. But let's take an example which is a little bit more in depth. So what we're going to do is, when we do the hands-on, we're going to create something which has multiple pages, right? Multiple URLs to support, and there we'll actually get to see how controllers actually work, right? Now the one thing which you have to keep in mind, convention over configuration. That is the core essence of Ember. So now I come back to your question. What's your name? Hardik. So Hardik had asked this question a long time back as to how does Ember know that this is the application route, right? So the way Ember knows is naming. It's naming. If you have the application route, you're going to call it the application route case sensitive. The controller for application route is going to be called application controller. The view is going to be called application view. And that holds true for any template that you're going to bind. So if I have a template called as users, then the route is going to be called what? Users route. The view is going to be called users view. The controller is users controller. And so on and so forth. Right? Now, the way Ember is stitching all of this up is by knowing these names. So when I define a template and I define a pertaining route to it, Ember is going to pick that up and it's going to bind the template to the route, to the controller, to the view, to the model, to whatever you have defined it. Right? And the model, ideally, for a case like this, should be something like a model.user. So it is always convention over configuration, and this is where Ruby comes into picture, right? I think Ruby also follows a very, very similar protocol. And this is where you actually see that the creators of Ember have put in a lot of thought where you need not actually sit and think about how you're going to wire up stuff. You don't need to define it. I don't need to tell Ember that my user route is going to be called users route, because I already know that it's going to be called users route. And based on that presumption, I can automatically define and use it. There is no configuration that I'm going to put into picture, right? So now, let us move into something a little more interesting, right? So we're going to do a little hands-on.
So let's begin with today's workshop. In today's workshop, we are going to build an application like IMDB using Ember.js. The scope of the application is going to be very simple. We are primarily going to create a single page application where on one side we'll see the list of the movies, and on clicking on a particular movie we'll see the actual details of the movies, and if we want we can edit them. So let's get started. I want you all to create a project folder called as IMDB app. Inside this we're going to create a simple folder called as scripts. Scripts folder will have Ember 1.1.2, handlebars, and jQuery. Apart from that, we also have another folder called as styles, which has bootstrap.css. I'm going to be using Bootstrap for building up the site because frankly I'm comfortable with it. So now let's have a look at my index.html. So in my index.html, you see that I already have some amount of code plugged in. I have the application template. Inside the template, I have defined a navigation bar, a navigation header, and I have defined the IMDB app as an ember.application of create. All of this we have seen in the past. So all of this I've already done. So let's just see what this application looks like as of now. So I'm going to say open in browser, and it's a very simple application, nothing fancy about it. So let's just go ahead and start planning out our application. So we need to show a list of the movies, which will be on a particular URL. We need to show the details of movies, which will be on another particular URL. So what do you think should be the URL associated with movies? Well, /movies sounds right? So if I want to create a route for /movies, what do I need? Basically, first and foremost, I need a template. So let me just go ahead and create the template. So I'll write a script. I will define it as x handlebars, and this time I will give it an ID. The ID is going to be called movies because this is a template for displaying movies. Now inside this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to define a div. This div will hold my movies list. So I'm going to give it a class. Oops. And inside this, I will want to iterate over all of the movies that I have and display them one by one. So how do I iterate? Well, handlebars gives me a very efficient helper, which is called as the each helper. So I'm just going to go ahead and say hash each movie in model. So this will iterate over the model that I have, and it will give me every element as movie. So I know that since this is a route that shows all the movies, it's going to show me a list of movies. So I need to just iterate over it and show them as they come. So I will say div, and inside this div, I will just display the title of the movie, and that is going to be it. So now we have defined a template where we iterate over all of the movies in the list, and we just show the model, and we just show the title. So now let's go back to our script. So over here, we have already defined an application. Now the first thing that we need to do here is that we need to define the model. So let's just go ahead and create that. So I'm going to say IMDB app dot movie equal to Ember dot object dot extend, and I'm going to put in the properties of movies over here. So my movies will have an ID, they will have a title, they will have a year of release, they will have a summary. So let's just keep it to that. They can also have, say, genre and a rating, right? So with this, I have created the movie class. So now let's go ahead and create the model. So our model is going to be an array of movies, a list of movies. So let's define var movies as an array. And inside this array, we will insert multiple elements of the type IMDB movie. So let's instantiate IMDB movie here. IMDB app.movie.create. And let's create one more. So let me just copy this and paste it here. So this basically instantiates two objects of IMDB movie. But wait, I don't have any data inside it. So let's put in some data. So I already have it pre-configured, got it from IMDB itself. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to copy one more. I'm going to paste it here. And similarly, I'm going to just go ahead and create one more. So paste it here. And that's it for now. So we have created an array of movies. We have instantiated with 3 movie objects, and we're good to go. Now, looking at our template, we need a model, right? But over here, we've not defined a model. So let's go ahead and define a model. So how do we define a model? Well, we start with the route. So we say IMDB app dot movies route equal to Ember dot route dot extend, and we define the model in here as a function which returns movies, right? So we have movies being returned, we have the movie object, and we have the movie template. So let's fire it up and see if it works. I'm going to go here, I'm going to Control F5, and nothing happens. So why did nothing happen? Because we are on index.html. We have not navigated to the movies route. So let's do that. Let's navigate to the movies route. So I'm going to write /movies, and nothing happens again. So what happened here? Why did nothing happen? Well, the reason why nothing happened was we have not told Ember that movies is a route that Ember understands. We need to tell Ember that there is something called as movies, for which there is a template called as movies, which you need to be able to render. So let's go ahead and define Ember's routers. So I'm going to write IMDB app dot router dot map. Map takes a function, and inside this function I will define a resource. So what is a resource? A resource is essentially the template or the view that is bound to a particular route. So I know I have a template called as movies, so I define the resource movies, but I'm not going to give it a path. So if I don't give it a path, what does Ember say? So Ember says, if you don't give me a path, I'm going to say that the name of the path is the same as the name of the resource. So let's go and see if it works. We refresh and nothing happened. So what happened this time? We have defined the resource. It seems to work fine. We have defined the model and we have defined the object. Our template seems correct, but still it doesn't work. So the reason why it didn't work is that we have not told Ember where to render our template in. We have obviously defined what to render and how to render it, but not where. So the way Ember does is that it uses the helper outlet. So the moment you write the outlet helper, wherever you write the outlet helper is where your template will be rendered. As we know, the application template gets rendered across all pages, and everything that is very specific to that page can be rendered inside the outlet helper. So let's go and refresh the page. And we see that all the three parts have come working absolutely fine. Now let's move on. So let's say that now I want to view the details of one particular movie. How would I do that? So I will say I will create a template, X handlebars, and give it an ID, movie. And inside this, I want a div, probably give it a class of page header, define an h1 with the title, put up a span, put some brackets and define the year, and at the end of it just define the summary. What else? Probably define the rating as well. So the rating, and put a header to that. The rating is, and I think we're good to go, right? So now we have defined the template movie. Let's go ahead and repeat the process where we'll define the model. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say IMDB app dot movie route. Remember, convention over configuration is ember dot route dot extend, and I want the model to return a fun. So it will return something for now before we get into the concepts. So now what do you want the model to return? Well, the model should ideally return one particular movie. I know movies is an array. So now I will just ask for an index, but I don't have an index. So what do I do? Well, let's just take a step back again and think. When I am calling a particular details of a movie, what is going to be my URL? My URL is going to look something like movie/1, movie/The Godfather. Basically, I'm passing the name, or I'm passing the ID, or any kind of a unique identifier associated with that movie, as a URL parameter, right? And I'm going to use this particular URL parameter to get whatever movie I'm listening to, not listening to, interested in. So what Ember does is Ember provides me with a way by which I can get the URL parameters, and that is the model function takes a params. And what is inside params? Well, the params has whatever property I want to define it in. So let's just say my params gives me a movie ID, right? So now I know that I need to get a movie ID out of my parameters. Let's go ahead and define the route. So over here, if you remember, we have defined the resource as movies, but now we want to define another resource, another route, which will be a sub-route of movies. So how do we define a sub-route? So I'm going to say function, and just the same way as we had used resource earlier, we're going to say resource, and we are going to say movie. So the resource is a movie. So use the movie template, use the movie route, use the movie controller, all of those things. But I don't want my path to read something like movie/movie/1. I just wanted to read /1, right? Movie/1. So I'm going to define a custom path. So I'm going to say path, and over here we are going to define the URL parameter. The way that is defined is you put a colon and you put the parameter name. So I'm going to call it movie ID, right? So this means that my movies path is going to have a subroute, which is going to be a /movie ID. I have defined that within my model over here. So I'm actually getting one particular movie. I have got my template ready. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to say movies/1, enter. Oops, nothing happened again. So something went wrong. Well, as you can very well guess, we have not put an outlet tag. So let me just copy this outlet and go to my movies, and I'm going to say create another div, give it a class, give it say call MD8 and a div, and just put in the outlet here. Refresh and it works fine. So let's try it for other IDs. So I'm going to say 2, I have the Godfather coming, and I say 0, and I have the Shawshank Redemption coming. So that works absolutely fine. But now this really doesn't look good, does it? As in, I don't want to just put in the ID or the URL again and again and again. It's so boring. So let's link the movies on the left to the details on the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a link to helper. So now, how do you define a link to helper? Well, very simple. You say #link to. Where do you want to link to? You want to link to a particular movie. And what movie do you want to link to? Well, I want to link to this particular movie. So this is movie. And we are going to end the link to. We'll do a / link to, and it's good to go. So let's refresh. Well, all of our things are links. We just click on it. The data keeps changing perfectly fine. Everything looks okay. Everything looks perfect. Everything looks beautiful. Right? So now, let's do something interesting. Right? Let's put an editing functionality. So I want to be able to edit this if I want. Right? So I'm going to say, okay, fine. You remember from the views part that we can directly define input boxes. So I'm going to say input value equal to title. I'm going to put it inside a div so that I can differentiate it. So put it inside a div, give it a class, row maybe, and I'll just copy this entire thing and paste it 3-4 times. So what do I want to update? I want to update the year, I want to update the rating, and I want to update the summary. But then again, summary is not an input type, it's text area because it's a lot of data. So let me just refresh the page. Looks perfectly good. But then again, there's something wrong with the text area. I really can't see stuff in it. So let me just go ahead and see. Can I do the conventional rows equal to 10, columns equal to 10? Just like you would do in an HTML. Can we do that? Seems like you can. That's pretty neat. That is really, really neat. So good thing done. Does this work? Let's say 1973 seems to work fine. It's not 9.2, it's 9.8. That seems to work fine as well. So let me just put a little bit of a syntactical sugar here. Title, and let's just say year, and let's just say rating, and let's just say summary. Right? And we're going to give it a simple class of form control. We're going to copy this and paste it for every value. We forgot a semi quotation mark. Copy and keep pasting. Right, let's refresh this page. This should have a lot of styling. Looks perfectly nice to me. Cool. So we are done. So now, obviously, this does not look good. I mean, seriously, you just can't have the edit button show up everywhere, right? You can't have the edit part show up. So let's put a simple button. Let's put an edit button, which will just display whenever we are going into the editing mode. So I will say button. This will have text edit and end the button. We refresh and I get an edit button. Oh, let's just right align this thing. Class, pull right. Let's see, it's gone to the right. It's handled. Cool. So we have the edit button, but clicking on it doesn't work. The text areas are still here. What do we do about that? So what we need to do here is we need to kind of create a condition based on which these things will display or not, right? So I don't know. Let's create an if helper now. So if I am editing, I want to show all these things. Whoa, Control X, Adobe. If I am not, I want to show the edit button, and that is it. That is all that if has. And if I'm editing, what I also want to do is I want to create a done button. So I have a button which will be called done. I'm going to realign this and let's see if that works. Well, it is hidden all right, but nothing seems to happen. Obviously, because we have not defined is editing as anything, and we really have not bound any logic to anything. So let's go ahead and define the is editing functionality, right? So we're going to say IMDB app dot movie controller. So now we are entering the controller bit. Ember dot object controller. So Ember has two kinds of controllers. It has an object controller, which is basically a controller when you're binding an object, and it has an array controller when you're binding an array. Since we're binding to one particular movie, this is going to be an object controller. So I am saying is editing is false. Right? Let me refresh, no effect. Seems to work fine. Does it work on the other links? Seems so. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to define how clicking on the done button and edit button actually changes things, right? So I'm going to define an action. So when I'm on edit, I'm going to say, well, if I'm on edit, my action is editing. Let's just call it start editing. And when I click on done, the action that I want you to perform is done editing, right? So now let's go and map these two functions. So inside my controller, I already have these editing. So I'm going to say start editing, which is a function, and done editing, which is also a function. But what will these functions do? So what start editing will say is, okay, fine, I'm going to set is editing to true. And what will done editing say? Well, done editing will say the exact opposite, and done editing will say I want to set is editing to false. So let's run this again. Whoa, something really horrible happened. So I'm going to go here and cannot call get with an ID of an undefined object. So what do you think happened here? So if you look at our code, we actually see that we have all of the code working. Everything seems to be all right. And yet over here we are getting an exception, right? So let's just look into it. Do we see anything here? So let's just go to the movies part. So let's click Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather, The Godfather 2. Well, it seems to work fine. I guess it was just a normal glitch. Oh, it does not work on refresh, does it? Seems like it doesn't work on refresh. Oh, I know why it doesn't work on refresh. So let's just try it out. Yes. So, funny problem. So the thing that has happened here is that we are actually indexing it, but the IDs that we are passing are not zero based, but one based. So the index that it is taking over here is again not zero based, but one based. So that is the problem that is happening here. So we're just going to change that. We're going to say -1 and refresh the page to get the appropriate value correctly. And we're going to say 3. It works fine. 1, 2, 3. Right? Cool. So we're done. Now, oh, we were checking out the editing flow. So let's click on the edit button. You have the details coming up. So let's try and edit something. This is a pretty good movie. Let's see that get updated. Well, yes, if you can see over here at this point of time, you can say actually that I have seen this movie. So it actually gets updated. Well, let's try and edit. So I'm going to say it's not part 2, but it's part 3. And you see that the part 3 got updated over here as well as over here, which means that the model is actually binding across everything, right? So I'm going to click on done now, and I'm done. So I go to the Godfather. Well, there's some details here. I go to the Shawshank Redemption. I come back. My details are still persisting. So in this way, we have managed to create a very simple and small application using Ember.js. And you have learned a very, very basic way to create something out of nothing, right? So go ahead and explore Ember.js as much as possible. Play with it and just have fun, right? Thanks a lot.